Well, the first thing to recognize is the military bases in the Gulf Arab states ended up being more targets than a shield. And these countries are now running scared. From Kuwait down to Qatar, they're actually going to start dismantling the US bases. So where does this leave the region? Last year, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia conducted a defense agreement. That was the beginning of this process. Pakistan has been absolutely essential. Asim Munir, the head of the military, has been leading it. It's been essential in the diplomatic opening with Iran. I mean, you've got to remember that it's just about 2 years ago, Pakistan and Iran exchanged fire near the border of Balochistan. So, this is an incredible feat of diplomacy by the Pakistanis to come so close to the Iranians. They have now drawn in the Turks into this agreement. But it's very important that we know that Iran was forewarned about this agreement. It has been made clear by Interior Minister Naqvi, who traveled from Pakistan to Iran and told the Iranians that this is not an anti Iran regional agreement. The Iraqi leadership, the Prime Minister of Iraq traveled to Iran to talk about this agreement. Everybody seems to understand that this agreement, which includes Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, is not anti Iran. It's not a Sunni alliance. It's not an Islamic alliance. You don't need that. You already have the Organization of Islamic Countries. Instead, this is an alliance of three major partners who are saying that with the United States backing out of the region, they need some sort of security arrangement, and this is what this is going to be. In fact, Turkey very eager to bring in Egypt. Fascinating if Egypt were to come into this. But essentially, this is a non-US rather than an anti-US regional security agreement. And I think it's an enormous development if it is able to sustain itself, because that's the other thing. This might fall apart, tomorrow. We don't know. But we do know that eventually, I think Egypt might come into this, and we're going to have to watch very carefully what Iraq does, because Iraq has all kinds of complexities here. Iraq could go in any which way. And we got to watch very carefully what the Iraqi resistance forces do when the US troops finally withdraw on the 30th of September, which is the deadline, and whether at the same time the Iraqi resistance is willing to join the regular army and come under civilian command, or will it remain independent? And some say, therefore, able to strike US targets in the region if the war against Iran escalates. So really, it's a kind of watch and see, but certainly this is a sign that the United States no longer commands power in the Gulf Arab region, but indeed these countries are taking matters into their own hands.
As the US Iran Memorandum of Understanding, as I said, expired this week, Trump threatened to bomb the shit out of Oman. His words, not mine. Oman is a US ally. So he threatened to bomb Oman if it gets in the way of reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Washington basically can't beat Iran, so now it's threatening the neighbors. And it's not just Oman watching its back. Days after the war ground into a stalemate, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey signed the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement, a pact built on the idea that these countries can no longer leave their own security at the mercy of a superpower that just got them bombed by Iran and now threatens to bomb them itself. Meanwhile, the war was supposed to prove American strength has instead pulled warships and weapons out of the Pacific and into the Gulf, stretching Washington's Cold War posture toward China thinner than ever. And back at home, Americans are eating the cost in oil prices, inflation, and a slowing economy. The bill for a war Washington won't admit it's losing. So, what has this war actually exposed about the limits of American military and diplomatic power? Is ramped up militarism accelerating U.S. decline rather than reversing it? To break it all down, we're joined from Santiago, Chile, by Vijay Prashad, Executive Director of the Tricontinental Institute. for social research. Vijay, welcome back to Breakthrough Live.
Thanks for having me on Breakthrough Live. Great to see both of you, my favorite
Loving,
journalists.
well, you're one of our favorites too, and I'm loving this new look. Is this like a beanie? I don't what's happening here. It looks great. I like it. I
Interesting.
like it.
It's not a beanie, it's just a head protector.
Head
Is it
protector.
cold
All
there?
right, we'll take it.
When
Yeah.
Marco Rubio drops the sky, my head is protected.
That's a good
So
point.
true.
Fair. Well, we will be sending you our thoughts and prayers if that does happen. But in the meantime, let's jump right into it because we've got a lot to get to, and I know you've got other things you got to get to. So, BJ, 5 months into this war, still no ceasefire, no deal. Trump is threatening to bomb a U.S. ally over a shipping lane the U.S. can't secure. By any normal measure, that looks like a war Washington is not winning. Yet the response is not de-escalation, it's more threats and more military posturing. You've written extensively about empire in decline. Is this what it looks like, a superpower that can't achieve its objectives but also can't admit it, like dragging out a conflict that's cratering growth forecasts, spiking inflation, and hammering ordinary people's wallets from Tehran to Toledo? Walk us through what this war has actually cost the global economy, and whether that cost is itself a symptom of a U.S. that's lost the ability to translate military force into political wins.
Frankly speaking, the United States hasn't won a war in a very long time. It had to withdraw from Vietnam in 1975. It was defeated by the Taliban in Afghanistan, now back in power the last 5 years. It's having to withdraw most of its troops by 30 September from Iraq. Which war has the US won? Has it won the war in Libya, which continues to be in chaos? There's no evidence that in this period, overwhelming military force from the sky is able to actually subdue countries. There's no evidence. You can bomb Iran as much as you want, but the Iranians are still standing. There's 100 million of them. If Trump is not just unable to get a ceasefire with Iran, where's the ceasefire between Israel and its genocide? Even that Jared Kushner couldn't get. Benjamin Netanyahu sent him home with an empty suitcase. So, absent a cease of hostilities with the Palestinians, absent the ability to restart trade through the Strait of Hormuz unimpeded, absent all of that, the United States is, facing a strategic defeat once again. Maybe the lesson is that empires or imperialism in this period with this kind of technological wherewithal, war is not the instrument that it is most effective. Perhaps the most effective instrument is to make the economy scream. But even that, those tools are beginning to wither because Iran, yes, it's faced some serious civilian casualties and so on, but its economy is still sputtering along, helped by infusions from China, helped by neighboring countries, and so on. So, even the tools that the United States used to have to make the economy scream don't seem as effective now as they had been. I don't know if this is an empire in decline, Rania. I think that might be too much to say. But they certainly don't seem to be able to get their way.
Well, and I think, it might not be in decline, but I think people are associating the US more and more with uh, danger and liability. So, of course, countries in the Gulf specifically have seen that hosting US military bases and having the US as its primary partner in security has been less of a help and more of a, again, liability. And we saw this month that Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey signed the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement, declaring that an attack again on one is an attack on all, pooling Turkish military capabilities, Saudi financial and oil leverage, and Pakistan's nuclear deterrent And this is completely outside, we think, of any US led framework. So, how significant is this pact, and is it a genuine step toward the kind of global South strategic autonomy that you've written about for years? Or is it more of a hedge by frightened governments trying to survive a region that Washington keeps setting on fire and seemingly doesn't care about doing so?
Well, the first thing to recognize is the military bases in the Gulf Arab states ended up being more targets than a shield. And these countries are now running scared. From Kuwait down to Qatar, they're actually going to start dismantling the US bases. So where does this leave the region? Last year, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia conducted a defense agreement. That was the beginning of this process. Pakistan has been absolutely essential. Asim Munir, the head of the military, has been leading it. It's been essential in the diplomatic opening with Iran. I mean, you've got to remember that it's just about 2 years ago, Pakistan and Iran exchanged fire near the border of Baluchistan. So, this is an incredible feat of diplomacy by the Pakistanis to come so close to the Iranians. They have now drawn in the Turks into this agreement. But it's very important that we know that Iran was forewarned about this agreement. It has been made clear by Interior Minister Naqvi, who traveled from Pakistan to Iran and told the Iranians that this is not an anti Iran regional agreement. The Iraqi leadership, the Prime Minister of Iraq traveled to Iran to talk about this agreement. Everybody seems to understand that this agreement, which includes Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, is not anti Iran. It's not a Sunni alliance. It's not an Islamic alliance. You don't need that. You already have the Organization of Islamic Countries. Instead, this is an alliance of three major partners who are saying that with the United States backing out of the region, they need some sort of security arrangement, and this is what this is going to be. In fact, Turkey very eager to bring in Egypt. Fascinating if Egypt were to come into this. But essentially, this is a non US rather than an anti US regional security agreement. And I think it's an enormous development if it is able to sustain itself, because that's the other thing. This might fall apart, tomorrow. We don't know. But we do know that eventually, I think Egypt might come into this, and we're going to have to watch very carefully what Iraq does, because Iraq has all kinds of complexities here. Iraq could go in any which way, and we got to watch very carefully what the Iraqi resistance forces do when the US troops finally withdraw on the 30th of September, which is the deadline, and whether at the same time the Iraqi resistance is willing to join the regular army and come under civilian command, or will it remain independent? And some say, therefore, able to strike US targets in the region if the war against Iran escalates. So really, it's a kind of watch and see, but certainly this is a sign that the United States no longer commands power in the Gulf Arab region, but indeed these countries are taking matters into their own hands.
And I want to I want you to elaborate just a little bit in the sense that, I mentioned Oman before, this longtime US security partner and this back channel to Iran, with the US's permission, by the way, now on the receiving end of yet another direct threat from Trump. This isn't the first time Trump has threatened to bomb Oman. This is a country that already watched Iran strike Gulf states hosting US assets during the war. And now it's the US threatening to bomb it too. So why would any country in the region want to be Washington's friend right now? Like, what does it do to the credibility of US security guarantees, not just in the Gulf, but even beyond the Gulf, when this is how Washington so flagrantly and openly treats the allies who host its bases and who take the hit when its wars go sideways?
Well, firstly, I just want to put on the record that Muscat, which is the capital of Oman, is probably one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I find it an amazing place. Also, The Omani total population is 5 million, which is a fraction of the population of New York City. It's a very sparsely populated country. Or Muscat is where the bulk of the population is. It's a beautiful coastal country, and it has the right to close a section of the Strait of Hormuz because it's its territorial waters. That's what it's negotiating with Iran around the question of right of access through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Mr. Trump can threaten to bomb whoever he wants. I hope he doesn't strike Muscat. That would be very sad. That's a little bit like the bombing that's been taking place in Sana'a, Yemen. Sana'a, Yemen is another beautiful city. It's a UN heritage city. It's been struck repeatedly, including the old part of the city. It's a great tragedy. But at any rate, why would anybody be a friend of the United States? A good question to ask. I mean, who has the US not struck, Rania? I mean, perhaps one needs to make a list of countries in the Arab region, and see which country has not been hit. The United States bombed Syria, it's bombed Iraq, it's bombed Yemen, it's bombed many of the other countries at some point. I mean, I don't have a list before me. Certainly Lebanon, certainly the Palestinians via the Israelis. I mean, we can make a list and then subtract out of them who have been saved Western bombardment. Not many countries, I must say. Why would you trust anybody? It's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of what are your options. And a country like Oman, particularly after the uprising in Dhofar in 1975, basically took refuge in one foreign military power after the other. In fact, the monarchy sought protection from its own citizenry. And at this point, this monarch, pretty interesting person, has sort of rebranded Oman as a place of diplomacy. He's the one who urged Yemen and Saudi Arabia to come to the table. He provided the back channel for Iran. He has been interested in being a mediator in other disputes, not only in the region, but in the world. I mean, he wants to convert Oman from what it is, which is an autocracy, into a address for diplomacy, a kind of Switzerland of the Middle East. And here goes Donald Trump saying, I'm going to flatten a country of 5 million people, Mr. Trump. It's half the size of Cuba. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean it's ridiculous. I think in addition to the list of all the countries that the US has bombed in the region, interesting to look at a list of all the countries that the US has threatened since Donald Trump took office, because it is, I mean, every day a different country. But Vijay, pivoting to another part of Asia, we know that this question of US credibility, moves is beyond West Asia. The entire world has been impacted by this war, and in ways that perhaps we weren't expecting. Like, for example, the US has been pulling carriers, aircraft, and weapon systems out of the Indo-Pacific and into the Gulf, thinning out the force posture that was supposed to be squaring off against China, number one declared enemy. So the Cold Warriors are, of course, very upset about this. But what does this perhaps temporary diversion mean for Washington's Cold War posture towards Beijing? Does it expose how overextended the US military actually is when it tries to confront two fronts at once? And does it hand China a strategic opening it didn't even have to fight for?
Yeah, I mean, look, the test of this is, in fact, the issue of South Korea, because Mr. Trump just announced that the United States is not going to participate, as it generally does, in a major military exercise in South Korea, because, as Mr. Trump says, he has a good relationship with the North Koreans and he wants to open a front of dialogue with Pyongyang. Okay, that was a really interesting development. Just as the US troops are moving from the so called Indo Pacific toward the Gulf, the sailors on the Abraham Lincoln have been at sea for 250 days, 200 of them without a stop on dry land. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. As the United States itself has said, this may be a world record, not a good record, not a record to be in favor of. But there certainly does seem to be a pullback from East Asia for now. I would imagine, given the way Iran has been able to strike U.S. bases in the Gulf Arab states, I imagine that there's a lot of scrutiny and concern in Tokyo, in Seoul, in countries that have US bases sitting at the edge of China. They must be considering, if the United States strikes China, China will do exactly as the Iranians did strategically and hit, yes, the bases in Seoul, hit the bases in Okinawa, and so on. I mean, why not?
Mhm.
Iran has demonstrated that the strategy of going after the 900 US bases around the world is in fact the most powerful strategy, because then countries start to reconsider giving their real estate to the United States, in the name of so-called defense. So yeah, I mean, I think there must be, given what happened in Seoul with the military exercise, given the fact that Iran has been able to hit US bases and so on, there must be some reconsideration happening. If Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia can have a Mecca agreement, why can't, let's say, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines sit down and say, look, let's have a discussion about
Mhm.
our own security in this region, absent the United States. Let's perhaps open a channel and talk to Beijing and say, how serious are you about these disputes on islands and water and so on? Can't we close some of these things? So I won't be surprised if within a couple of years we have a Tokyo agreement or a Seoul agreement or a Manila agreement. It's possible.
Mm.
Well, BJ, thank you so much for breaking all this down for us. We really appreciate you. I could listen to you talk for hours, but unfortunately, we'll have to end this here. You are one of our favorite guests. So we will be coming back to you
Wow.
for more of your
Thanks a
excellent
lot, Rania.
analysis.
Thanks a lot. And thanks, I mean, and therefore I forgive you for calling my hat a beanie. The Egyptians,
What is
this is
it?
I'm
very,
a millennial. It's what it looks like to me. It looks like a
It's
yeah,
Egyptian?
this is a this is a very old Egyptian topi, which is definitely not a beanie. But I know some people have
wow.
previously called it a beanie. It's okay.
I
It's,
mean,
you know,
You're
honestly,
so
what I'm waiting
cultured,
for is
BJ.
you to get a hacky sack out and start like throwing it around between your feet and hands, like people in college would during my time.
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
look that's the look you
Going a
got
bit
right
far.
now. Skater boy.
Well,
Well, thank
that's
you.
okay.
Thank you so much, BJ. We appreciate you so much. We'll have
We
you back
miss
on
you.
again
Bye.
soon.